And we're hoping to provide plenty of time for Q&A at the end to make it all clear, since we know our process is not typical. So go ahead, Chuck.
All right, so there's the nice, pretty start. And if any of you have already seen this presentation from me, I've been doing quite a few of them. I apologize in advance for hearing it twice, but it's all great information. So how lucky you are, right? All right, so there we go. So we have this brief presentation that shares a little bit about what national heritage areas are, what feasibility studies are, and how we carry them out, what we hope to accomplish through the evaluation of some specific criteria, and then why it is that we're doing one at all in the Finger Lakes right now. I believe everybody has access to a PDF version of this presentation. If you don't, we'll get it to you shortly after the call, because it also includes a lot of great links where you can find more information about the Heritage Area Program, and then also all important, more information about how the public can communicate it with us directly during the comment period of this project.
Chuck, if I might just interject for a moment, I don't believe folks have this, but if you can provide it to Genesee Finger Lakes, we will post it on the local government workshop website so people can access it there. And we can probably get that up today or tomorrow. We've done that with the other sessions. So
happy to do it.
Great, thank you.
All right. All right, so what is a national heritage area? Currently on that map there, you can see there are 55 existing national heritage areas in 34 states across the U.S. Each one of those was created through an individual federal law. An NHA is a place that's designated by Congress where natural, cultural, historic, and scenic resources combine to form what we call a cohesive, nationally distinctive landscape that arise from patterns of human activity shaped by geography. So they're basically NHAs through the resources that exist within them, cultural resources, geologic resources. They tell an important national story that celebrates our country's diverse heritage. They are lived-in landscapes, as you can see on that map. Some of them are quite large, and so consequently they are managed in like a grassroots fashion by a local entity. More on that in just a second. There are a couple of bullets on that screen, though, that are very important to point out. National heritage areas are not national park units. Rather, the National Park Service provides technical assistance and is the source for federal funds that come from Congress to fund NHA activities. The National Park Service does not assume ownership of land inside of a heritage area, nor does designation come with any kind of land use controls or federal regulations. So a little bit more about what they are. As I mentioned, they encompass that nationally distinctive landscape, and they seek to tell a unique and nationally important story. The organizing model for a heritage area is grassroots oriented. The idea is that through the partners that are created by the coordinating entity that runs the place, it fosters a community-based decision-making process that via the programs and activities that the coordinating entity chooses to support, it makes the goal is to make heritage relevant to local community. Once they're established, congressional appropriations are passed through the National Park Service to NHA coordinating entities. The legislation that creates them defines specifically how much money an individual NHA can receive. Usually they get authorized to receive up to $1 million in federal funds. To date, there has never been enough money put in that overall account for national heritage areas. So typical appropriations to an individual heritage area are in the realm of $150,000 to $750,000 a year. The money that heritage areas receive has to be matched one-to-one, and coordinating entities do that through those partnerships that they develop, and also through their own means, and through, again, with that goal being that the federal funds must be matched to encourage that grassroots support of the entity. Again, pointing back out, nothing in a national heritage area, by designation itself is managed or owned by the federal government, and no land use or regulations are changed just because of an NHA designation. So what kind of things do NHAs work on? Typically, the coordinating entity will leverage those federal funds by matching them with partner resources to support things like conservation and natural resource protection, invasive species cleanups, litter cleanups, things like that. Historic preservation projects are big, not only including like physical work on historic properties, like the nuts and bolts of fixing up historic structures and landscapes, but also documentation projects, oral histories, National Register nominations, things like that. Recreation programs, trail programs are big with national heritage areas across the country. Education and interpretation programs, the development of waysides and websites to support and interpret historic properties in the NHA. Community development projects, streetscape improvements. Some NHAs have been involved in Main Street revitalization programs. And then also a big one is economic development, especially in association with things like heritage tourism. This slide is in here so that you will have it, so that you have a link to more information about the National Heritage Area Program. Via this link here, you can also find all the details on feasibility studies and the criteria associated with them, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. And you can find links to all the other existing heritage areas. This is a great resource for learning more about how the program works and how it's applied across the country. All right, so what is going on? What are we up to right now in the Finger Lakes? The Park Service is working on a feasibility study for determining the eligibility of the Finger Lakes region as a potential national historic, or as a NHA, as a national heritage area. Sorry. So the feasibility study is a report that documents the processes that are undertaken by the National Park Service with the help of residents of a region to determine whether or not the landscape being examined has the distinctive resources to tell a nationally important story, and then also the local capacity necessary to manage a heritage area if one was created. It examines whether authorization as a national heritage area is an appropriate strategy for achieving a resource conservation goals and the economic development goals of a study area. The process for the development of a feasibility study is laid out in the evaluation of 10 specific criteria that I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, but basically it's seeking to answer two questions. Is that unique nationally important story being told in a particular place, and can that story be experienced by the public through its resources? And then also, is there public support for the designation of a heritage area and for an organization that could manage it? Ultimately, our final product will result in findings that are delivered to the Secretary of the Interior, who will prepare a recommendation to Congress. It is important to note, though, that this study itself will not create a national heritage area, nor will it halt the creation of a national heritage area. That designation can only be delivered by Congress, and it must be done in a new piece of legislation. They can act without the study findings being complete. They could choose to create a national heritage area, even if the Secretary's recommendations are negative. And they can choose to not act on a recommendation, even if the findings are positive. So all that just said to point out that this is a study and will not ultimately in itself result in an NHA designation or not. So how are these studies initiated? Why is the National Park Service doing one? Basically, they can be done two ways. A local advocate for the idea of a heritage area in a place can conduct one of these studies on their own. They would work then submit it to the National Heritage Area Program for review and provide it to the National Park Service for review and edit, and then passing to the Secretary. Which is more recently more common, Congress requests through legislation that the National Park Service conduct a study and requests that the Secretary deliver that recommendation to them. In 2019, Congress passed the Dingle Act, which had a whole bunch of direction to federal land managers all over the country. But one of the stipulations in it was that the National Park Service conduct a feasibility study looking at the 14 counties that are on your screen right now and determining whether or not that nationally important story was there and whether or not they could be considered eligible as a new national heritage area. So as I mentioned, as we look at those 14 counties and also areas potentially outside of those counties that may be tied back to that nationally important story if one is identified, there are these 10 specific criteria. This is kind of an abbreviated list of them, and you can find out more about these on that website. But I'm going to boil them down a little bit into 5 smaller pots here. The first big question is, and I've mentioned this a few times now, does the landscape that we're looking at, those 14 counties, does it have an assemblage of historic, cultural, and natural resources that link together and tell a nationally important story? And then through those resources, is there an opportunity for the public to experience them? Like, can the public go to them? Can they see them? And if a national heritage area was to be created, is there a potential that heritage area could improve either the physical conditions of those resources or that opportunity for the public to experience them? And then this third one, are there ongoing traditions, customs, and lifeways that can be documented that tie back to that specific nationally important story? And then these 2 more buckets that are tied up with public support and why we really need some assistance in getting the word out and getting responses back to us on what folks think about the idea of a heritage area. But does an organization exist that could manage a heritage area if one was to be created? And is there public support for the idea of a heritage area? And also, is there public support for that coordinating entity? And is there organizations, local government entities, individuals from the public who have committed and indicated that they would like to work with a coordinating entity to do the good work of a national heritage area? Are there folks out there that are ready and willing and want to work with a heritage area if one was created? So it's a little overview about where we've been and where we hope to go over the next few months. As I mentioned, the Dingle Act passed in March of 19. The Park Service began working on this study in the very first funding cycle after that legislation was passed. Last year in spring 2020, the study team, including those folks in Denver and Washington and Philadelphia and in New York, had all intended to visit the study area and kind of and evaluate the resources and the place in person. Obviously, COVID stymied that opportunity, and in its place, and I think Martha's going to talk a little bit more about this in some coming slides. We held a series of focus group calls with resource specialists, 14 calls, county specific, where we invited natural resource specialists, educational specialists, recreation and tourism folks locally in the area, and we asked them to help us to understand what some of those important stories of the Finger Lakes are, and tell us a little bit about what the places are that represented those stories. That work, ultimately resulted in, along with academic research, resulted in the production of a draft context study, which includes draft themes, which could be considered an unevaluated version of what those potential nationally important stories might look like. And then in that report, it also includes a extensive list of resources, places that could support those potential themes. That document is under review as part of the commenting period now. Where we are here through, and that commenting period is going until June 1. We're basically hoping that the public, all of you, will look at that report and consider it as what the Park Service understands about the Finger Lakes, about this study area, and help us to understand whether or not we've missed anything, or what are the most important ideas that we may have presented in that work. Along with the document that's under review, there's also a public survey where we're hoping to get information back from organizations, the general public, local governments, concerning those other questions that the criteria are getting at about public support for an NHA designation, and then ideas on coordinating entities and public and support of potential coordinating entities and commitments to work with an NHA if one was created. All that is part of this public commenting period where we are right now. It ends in June 1st. Once that closes out, we're going to take what we've learned and work on the evaluation components of those 10 criteria, and hopefully have a study draft in the hands of at least the National Park Service reviewers by the end of the calendar year, and then on to the Secretary shortly after that. There's the next slide, I think, is where Martha is going to take over for me, or highlight anything I missed or didn't, or and then go on with some more slides here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chuck. And we're going to be able to share some of those materials that Chuck just described, which are pretty whiz bang here in a minute. So go ahead and advance to the next slide, please, Chuck. Thank you. And but before we move to showing you the materials that resulted from our research, which had to be all remote, unfortunately, we wanted to, talk to you, from government to government, employees and representatives and so on, to talk about the challenges of doing research, as Chuck referred to, academic research, site visits, and public outreach, trying to figure out how can we learn about this place and really make a reasonable and appropriate assessment of the place when we couldn't actually visit and see, come and see in person or talk to people in person. And I'm sure that this is something that, many of you have had to wrestle with yourselves during COVID. So hopefully sharing some of these tools will simply help everyone consider all the many options that we have available, and maybe add them to your list. And we'll be happy to hear from you during the Q&A session if you have some other ideas too that we can factor in moving forward for our projects, as we're all trying to learn together in this COVID world, how to do things remotely. So the original plan for our public outreach, remember, it's over 14 counties. And just to make it clear, the counties within the study area are for your regional planning council, I believe, if I have this right, it's Livingston, Monroe, Ontario, Seneca, Wayne, and Gates. And if you live or work in a county that is not one of those counties, we still want to hear from you. This is still relevant to you, but just to make it clear that in the study area and your regional planning council, it is those counties. But so here we were in March of 2020, and our plan had been sometime during the summer, and I put there, see on the left hand of the slide, I put our public outreach would have been 90 days. That's really a ballpark. We actually hadn't finalized our plans. It might have been 120 days. We don't really know, but we do know that bringing staff from Denver, Chuck's team of subject matter experts, Washington, D.C., my office, the regional planning office, and of course our staff in New York, we would have had to probably break this up into more than one trip. we would have done our best to have a couple of barnstorming trips where we started to create relationships with local governments and different entities and nonprofits and businesses, and then try to suss out how could we create the most appropriate and effective public in-person meeting pattern. And I'm not really convinced that we would have done one meeting for all 14 counties. We might have tried to co-locate them regionally just based on, where good meeting places were at schools or libraries or government buildings or what have you. And so we probably would have ended up doing what many pre-COVID public outreach processes typically would look like. We would have created a PowerPoint. We probably would have had what we call a newsletter, or you can think of it as a brochure. Usually this is an 11 by 17 foldover, so 4 pages total, introducing the study and our authorities to the study and how can you make your comment. We wouldn't have had a lot of content in it because we had just barely begun our research and didn't know a lot about the study area, but we would have prepared that kind of material. Probably we would have had some maps of the study area on easels at some public meetings and maybe done some dot exercises as people walked in the door, put a dot on the map, where are you from, within the study area and so on. And then in all likelihood, we of course want to drive as many people as possible to our online public comment portal, which we're still doing today. But we probably would have had comment cards in the back of the room at these public meetings. Again, we didn't have all of this mapped out, but those are the typical tools that we might have used, and perhaps we're planning on using, again, kind of over the summer of last year, maybe lopping a little over into the fall. And we would have been hoping to receive public comment about the level of support for the idea of a new national heritage area, should Congress ever choose to make one. And as Chuck has shared, there's no guarantee that Congress will ever make a national heritage area. We're just the planning staff doing what the elected officials asked us to do in terms of analysis. That's what we're doing the study for. But nonetheless, we wouldn't have had a lot to share because we were just beginning our learning process. And so we would have really focused on just what's the level of support for the vague, general, abstract idea of creating a new national heritage area. So in other words, our public sector or our public outreach process would have looked very similar to a lot of the public meetings that I'm sure many people on this call have hosted and been involved in the past. But of course, then mid-March of 2020, everything changed with COVID. We weren't allowed to travel safely. And in addition to just sort of getting our bearings like everyone else, in late March and into early April, we were now scratching our heads. It became clear we weren't going to be able to travel to even see the resources. And when we say resources, we mean the stuff, the things, the buildings, the historic site, the rivers, the natural features, the mountains, all the different things that we plan to study associated with the criteria, which are, as you've seen, is what Chuck shared, natural resources, cultural resources, recreational, tourism, and economic development sources, and so on. So when we say resources, we mean the things that exist that we can point at and learn about. In any case, we realized we couldn't come and visit those resources. And so how would we, A, start our research and learn about the resources so we can actually do the study, and B, start figuring out how to do public outreach when we couldn't do it in person. So we decided to initiate a multi-layered approach. And the first thing, and we won't talk about it a lot in this presentation, but you should just know that the Indian nations, the tribes, of which there are quite a number that have traditional associations with the area, the study area, we are obligated by Department of Interior policy and law to initiate formal consultations when the Park Service is planning to take an action that could have some impact, on the ground with how things are happening. So we initiated those formal consultations with the Indian nations, who are our first and oldest and most longstanding and ongoing partner. And that happens before, during, and after the public outreach phase. And so our relationship with them is never ending. And so we initiated those discussions in April of 2020. And we would have done that in any case. But how to begin our research and understanding the resources and doing public outreach. So the first thing we did was what I think is always advisable to do as planners and as a government entity. We asked for help from people who know best. Local wisdom is the best wisdom. And so we started reaching out and saying, well, we can't get everything we want. What can what can we, in terms of travel and so on, what can we do? And so we decided to expand our networks. And as Chuck was describing, the first thing we did was say, well, who's our first and most plugged in, natural, interested party? Well, in this case, it was the Finger Lakes Tourism Alliance, the FLTA. And this is a consortium of all 14 counties who, it's over 100 years old, I understand, and they have been dealing with tourism programming and activities for a long time in the area. They're very well organized. And in fact, they were the primary advocate for the legislation authorizing the study. And we knew this going in. We had started forming our relationship with the FLTA back in 2019. And this is very common in National Heritage Area studies, that there's usually a local advocate that asks Congress to authorize the study. So it's not at all uncommon that we would be talking to the FLTA and just saying, you know, hello, we know you're interested and you've been involved with this idea for some time and we're beginning the study. Okay, so in this case, we did something unusual. We don't normally have such a big role for the local advocate, but we called them up and we said, you know, as Chuck was describing, we need to start talking to people, to start even getting our bearings for what is contained in the study area, these 14 counties, as well as develop some local contacts that'll help us think through our public outreach campaign. And so we asked them, would you talk to your representatives in each of the 14 counties and ask them to corral 6 to 8 people, each one of them knowledgeable about one of the criteria that we need to study. So recreational resources and historic resources and natural resources and so on, exactly as Chuck was describing earlier. And so we convened these 2-hour calls, all 14 of them, where the full National Park Service team from Denver and DC and Philadelphia and New York and so on sat in. We introduced ourselves to this small group of people from each county. And I will say the Finger Lakes Tourism Alliance did a great job finding people who were in fact very knowledgeable about the resources in each county, not all of whom had any relationship with the FLTA, by the way. You know, they just have such a broad network. They were able to pull in academics and historians and, you know, people who really knew things that were well beyond, I think, what the FLT normally would deal with. So we're very grateful for their help. Anyway, so we introduced our study and we asked them to just tell us what's special about their county as we're just making a list in a way. What are the things that we should research? And so those conversations happened in May and were an incredible jumpstart where local people who really know something about the local area in each of the 14 counties really just shared a lot of very useful information to help get us started. And that simply asking for help and being vulnerable and letting people know we really need help in the beginning and we don't really know the study area and we really need your help. That actually helped quite a bit. And that expansion of our networks at the very beginning paid off with big dividends as we have, you know, moved forward. So Chuck, go ahead and advance the slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so we did those, we initiated tribal consultation before all of this began, and we did the focus group. So now we have some knowledge. And we had something to start with in terms of jumpstarting our more academic research with our historians and our natural resources specialists and so on the team, which are really largely in Chuck's team, but in Denver, but also other National Park Service staff, you know, in different places. So in July and August, we continued expanding our networks. We weren't quite sure how we were going to do public outreach, but it really was increasingly looking like we weren't going to be able to travel anytime soon. So what we did was we made a series of just simple, inexpensive phone calls to all 14 county governments. Now, our authorizing legislation and the National Heritage Area Program generally requires that the National Park Service works with state and local governments, as well as nonprofits and other individuals and entities in the proposed National Heritage Area boundary. And so it's a natural fit that we would be talking to the state and local governments anyway. But in this case, we really needed to talk to the local governments because we were trying to suss out how would we do a virtual public outreach campaign. And we knew that, again, the closer we could get to the ground, local wisdom is the best wisdom. And they would be able to be good sounding boards, you know. And so we called government to government, each of the 14 counties, and each county very kindly designated a point of contact. Not mostly in the planning departments, but not always. Sometimes it was in the tourism directors, if those were not co-located with the planning department. And occasionally it might have been in the clerk of the legislature's office and so on. Each county, just gave us a point of contact they wanted. And we had phone conversations with them and got really good advice on their ideas about how to reach people and what the local issues might be. And that all happened in July and August, where we just had a series of phone calls and started gathering information. And meanwhile, Chuck's team now has time, because we can't travel, to do as much research as possible and on all of these resources in the area. So we actually kickstarted our research sooner than we would have in the study. And we would have then some good information to share with the public, which is not always the case with our studies. Sometimes we do public outreach at the beginning and we don't have, all the materials that you're going to see today. Let's see, in the summer and the fall, we just continued every person we talked to through those focus groups and the 14 counties, they all seem to have a suggestion of someone we should talk to, a historian here or a site over there. And so we added that in while the subject matter experts in our Denver Service Center were now starting to go through all of their research and really start to learn the area. And we continue to nurture those relationships that we had gained from the focus groups and from the reaching out to the county governments. And just to keep our network, tenuously connected while we were doing a lot of behind the scenes work and waiting to see, frankly, if we would be allowed to travel in 2021. So in the summer and fall, you can see in the upper right of this slide, we started to summarize our research. And this is what Chuck referred to as the context study. It's a narrative. You can think of it as our theme paper, our book report of a draft of what we understand today, which we know is imperfect. And we know we need local people to help us sort out what have we missed that is still relevant to the criteria of the study. And, how can we best understand these materials and these resources? So we had the New York State Historic Preservation Office looped in. We started developing our relationship with them also in April and May of 2020. So by the time we got to the fall of 2020 and we had our first cut of our understanding of our research, our report, we sent it to the New York State Historic Preservation Office staff and had them edit it. Quite a number of staff actually played a role in that, because of course they know the resources better than we do as outsiders to the state. So we really appreciate their help as well. And again, this is consistent. We are required to coordinate with state and local governments in addition to others as a part of our authorities and our requirements for the study. In addition, because we actually have the luxury of doing so much research before we do the public outreach campaign, and because we had to figure out how to communicate our story virtually without being able to do any in-person meetings, which it was becoming increasingly clear in the fall that 2021 might not still allow us to travel, a dynamic story map, which we'll show in a minute, which is very, very cool. And Chuck's team, created that. It is meant to introduce the study in an inviting and interesting way and to share what we've learned so far and hopefully yield some feedback through our public comment portal so that people can let us know where we're getting things wrong or where we've missed things and what have you. And in addition, in the fall, we continue to just, keep those lines of communication open with all the people we've met through the focus groups and with the local governments and every other party and state and local entity. Just quick hellos here and there just to stay in touch. Okay, go ahead. Next slide, Chuck. So in 2021, by this time we had decided it's going to be an all virtual public outreach campaign. We really can't wait, and we can't assume that if we even waited another 6 months or something that conditions for travel would change. We just weren't sure. So we decided we're going to just launch it and go all virtual. We decided to make it a 90-day campaign precisely so that we would have ample opportunity to provide as many virtual public meetings as possible and presentations to get the word out. More commonly, we do a 60-day public comment period, but for this one, we decided we really needed 90 days for sure. So in January and February, we put the finishing touches on our draft narrative known as the context study, also our online story map. We created a press release, and that has to go through all kinds of internal reviews, as I'm sure you all know, before you send something out to the public. And we created a PowerPoint. Now, the PowerPoint we're showing, if you've seen this before, because we've given a presentation in your community, you'll know that most of the PowerPoints are maybe 5 or 6 slides shorter than the one that we're giving today. We expanded it today because this is a session with learning goals. We also were required to brief congressional staff. Those are our elected officials, and of course we've kept them in the loop. And we began scheduling public meetings. We reached back out to everyone in our network for the 14 county governments, the 4 regional planning councils, local watershed and lake associations. We got great help, in connecting with those groups, city governments, and so on. And basically, our goal has been, wherever possible, to become part of a meeting that is compliant with New York State's open meeting law. And the idea is that that would ensure that we'd be on an agenda, and that would be publicly noticed, and that would help to spread our word, because everything we do now is to encourage people, including everyone on this meeting today, to spread the word, to share our links, to encourage more public outreach, because we can't come in person. And then in March through May, so March 1st to June 1st is our 90-day public comment period. We launched that. And you can see on the right hand of the slide, when we send out the press release, which sometimes for a study, it's mostly some media contacts and a handful of local people. In some smaller areas, our studies can be really tightly focused. We don't really have that big a press release list. Well, in this case, we had 300 some people who were able to, who received the press release, again, to help us spread that word as wide as possible. So nurturing those relationships is really helpful. And again, just a reminder, our consultation with Indian nations continues on no matter what. And that before, during, and after. And the tribes are certainly welcome to participate in the public comment phase as well, but we have our own separate ongoing relationship with each sovereign nation. All right, Chuck, next slide. So March through May, here we are giving numerous presentations, and I think mostly Chuck, but a couple other people have given at least 17, maybe 18 now, with a few more to go, and we're just remaining flexible. So as people say, hey, we'd like you to give a presentation, we say, great, we'll show up. And we continue to provide briefings and updates to regional offices, and also to receive public comment through our online portal. June 1st, we'll close the comment period, as Chuck said, and then over the summer through the winter, we'll review what was shared with us. We will compare all suggestions to our criteria, and then we update our research as appropriate, and then we begin drafting the report. And so there we are. And just a quick note. Go ahead to the next slide, Chuck. Just a quick note that with these kinds of studies, after we close the comment period and we receive what people have shared with us, we kind of go silent for a while. We're not really, the client is Congress. And so until Congress has received the actual output of the study, unfortunately, we're not able to come back out to the public, as with many planning processes, and let people know, here's where we are on our study, here's what the outcomes look like, here are alternatives and options. With these kind of studies, we don't have that opportunity, because we deliver the final report and analysis to our elected officials who authorized and asked for the study. After they receive it, then it will be publicly available. So there is this frustrating waiting period, which we apologize for in advance. So Chuck, why don't you give them a quick show of the story map, and then we'll move on to Q&A.
Sure. You guys see that?
Yep.
So as Martha said, we did everything we could to make our virtual presence as palatable to the public as we could get it. So the story map here presents, a lot, is an independent website, and it presents a lot of what the information about national heritage areas, what the feasibility study, what a feasibility study is, what an NHA is. It's got information here, again, about the study area, what the other heritage areas across the country, some of the work that heritage areas do, great information on the kinds of projects that they carry out, things like that, and then a tour of regional, the existing heritage areas that are in the region, the things that the public around the Finger Lakes may have had experience with in the past, may recognize, and then get an understanding of what heritage areas are. And they've seen signs for these places, at least as they've driven around in their communities. So this map, this dynamic map of these existing heritage areas, as you scroll down through all of that, again, information similar to what I presented earlier on what is a feasibility study. There's throughout this website, there are plentiful links to, there's the guidelines for how a feasibility study is done, repeated links to the commenting platform, which is on a different National Park Service public commenting website, the kind of things we're evaluating, and then this great dashboard of resources. This is the same material that's in the context study, the draft document that's under review, but it's a little bit more interactive. The places that we've heard about in the study area, broken down by these potential themes, these potential national important stories here. So you click on any one of these and you find out a little bit about the place. So this is basically giving the public that opportunity to see what we know and to tell us what we may have missed in another more attractive version than reading it on that in that document. Again, links to our commenting website, and then a nice little one little question that we ask the public even on this website is to draw your idea of what the Finger Lakes, what is that place on a map of the world? What does that mean to you as an individual in the public? Draw me a circle around the Finger Lakes. Frequently asked questions, great stuff. And that's the end of that. And then if you, like, as I said, you click anywhere in that document for one of the comment now buttons, and you'll go right to the document that's under review here, or the comment now button to respond to some of those survey questions that help us with the individual evaluation. Maybe Martha, we ready for questions?
Go ahead. Yeah, go to the last second to last slide there, and that gives the link. So now you've gotten a preview. This gives you the links. If you just go to the project website, it's all linked there, but these give you the sort of the short versions to get to the context study document and itself and the zippy story map, as well as ways to comment. But we are eager for everyone on this in this gathering today to both provide your comment. We're very eager to hear from you, and also to spread the word. That's one of the reasons why we reached out to our brethren in arms here, in the planning field, through the regional planning councils, as well as the local governments, to kindly ask for your assistance to spread the word about the study. If you're so willing to put it on your websites or spread the word through your networks, so that we can, again, when we can't travel in person, how can we get the word out so that we can receive comment back and inform people about what we're doing. So that's it. I think you're welcome to we want to hear from you, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have now.
Great, thank you so much, Martha and Chuck. This was really a great presentation. I know all the links are in the slides here that we will post on our website, but would it be possible for either one of you to put the story map link right in the chat window for
Sure.
everyone, because that's a really powerful tool.
It definitely is.
And yeah. I had sort of a technical question on that, probably for Chuck. That was using the Esri product, correct? The story map feature of ArcGIS. Yeah.
Yep, ArcGIS Online is but yeah, it is an Esri product.
Great, thank you so much for that. We didn't see any questions. Well, there was one question about that during the presentation. but we have, oh, Dustin has a question. Go ahead, Dustin. You can unmute yourself and just ask directly.
Hey, so I live in Menopause Park. No, I'm sorry, dogs. The national natural landmark. So I don't know how that works with overlap.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Well, I mean, so that a national natural landmark is an important resource that we won't miss when we evaluate it. It's not an overlap associated with like management or anything doesn't mean anything, but it's definitely a well documented site that will get included and probably is, I'm sure it's on that resource list. I would hope so by now, but if it's not, that would be a comment to share with us.
I mean, also locally here in Mendon, we also have a Seneca Nation site, Dodioctun, which was, as far as a settlement, predates 1500, right around there, is kind of where they put it, with Marquis de Denonville and that whole march against Seneca Nation. Obviously there's a lot of Jesuit interaction out here as well. I mean, I think it's incredible that this area is being recognized, and it's not just being contained to the Finger Lakes themselves, which are an incredible resource that does need to be preserved, but that you guys are looking at the historical aspect of this as well. I live in a house that's 1810, so like it's kind of cool to like you guys are also investigating that, and probably rapidly finding out that history out here goes back year 1000, like that sort of stuff. Seneca Nation had documented thing in the park out back of lunar eclipse, and they were able to like trace that back to that site like the year 980 or somewhere around there. It's like, it's kind of cool. But I appreciate it. Thank you much.
Great, Dustin, thank you. That's an excellent segue. I'm just going to give a brief plug for our next session coming up Thursday, which is on how to better acknowledge and recognize Indigenous people in our local land use processes. I think the planning profession has a lot to make up for over the course of its history, and there's some interesting examples locally and across the U.S. and Canada about how we're starting to do a little bit better on acknowledging Indigenous peoples. But it's certainly a topic I would like to learn more about, and I'm very interested in speaking with folks who know more about it than I do, because unfortunately it's not something we tend to learn a lot about in history or planning school even. So so thanks for bringing that up, and I'm looking forward to learning more. Let's see here.
And I'd like to recommend that you put that in our public comment portal so we have it recorded, in your words. Also, please do, because we want to make sure that what the places and things that you mentioned are reflected in our study. And you'll see in the context study draft, there are sections where we actually have, this section may be changed based upon input received from Indian nations. We're, just a note to the public that what shows up in the final report, whatever that'll look like, might be different from the draft you're seeing, because we actually are looking for, on the ground information that relates to the Indigenous peoples, but we're waiting for them to tell us how they would like us to characterize their history and their resources, and so on, not trying to make too many suppositions. So your information would be very helpful if you could include that as well. And just for everyone, just remember Jason, I'm thinking of your comment there. The State Historic Preservation Office for your state includes historians who are, have relationships with and knowledge of the different Indian nations, the tribes. And of course, there are state and federally located ones, and New York State has a particularly fraught, history and set of legal relationships. I won't go into that, here, but it is, I think it's important for all of us to recognize, certainly as a federal agency, we recognize the sovereignty of Indian nations, and we of course have our own policies that we follow for our communications, which is highly formalized But I think making sure that that's something that's in the top of our minds is a good practice.
We have another question. Thank you for that, by the way, Martha. We have another question. Finger Lakes National Heritage Area is a great idea, but I was wondering if there are any National Heritage Area studies that recommended that the NHA not be created.
Indeed, and I actually got a direct message and I responded, you know, before we give some kind of definitive answer, we'd have to check, right? But we, as planners, we are not advocates. You know, we advocate for fair rules to the game and to the analysis. But there is always an option that the final finding, as we say, it's a positive finding or a negative finding. We don't enter into it with any kind of predetermined outcome. I will say that the NHA criteria relative to our other types of special resource studies, because we have ones that look at maybe a very specific site and then analyze whether or not that stacks up against the criteria to become a new national park unit or something. Those are much more technical and detailed, and the bar is very high, you know, for that kind of analysis. NHAs, because of the breadth of the criteria that Chuck, you know, described and shared earlier, it is far more flexible. So but I don't know what the rate of, you know, negative versus positive over the decades, you know, has been. So Chuck, do you have any insight on that?
No, not on the rate. And earlier it used to be more common for local sponsors to conduct the feasibility studies themselves and deliver that. And that's becoming less common now. It's more the Congress telling us to do it. And like Martha said, it's that objective evaluation. People latch on to, as when we show folks this, you know, like this historic site or that historic site or this geologic resource and that geologic resource and how great this place is and that place is. But I try to get people to look at tell me about that place, but tell me what the nationally important story that is distinctive and can only be told in the Finger Lakes and is something that folks everywhere in the country should understand as part of our diverse and shared heritage, because that's the part of the criteria that is hard. Every place has history, but what is that? What's unique and special and can only be told there? And that's the part of the evaluation that sometimes is trickier to pass. So there's no guarantee that things pass, I guess, is the short answer. And no guarantee that Congress listens to the evaluation either. Exactly.
We can't say that enough. There is no guarantee. We do not speak for the elected officials. We work for them and not the other way around. So they could create a national heritage area tomorrow by passing a new law, even without our study, or any study having been authorized in the past. And likewise, we can create a report and it maybe has a positive finding, it all looks good. And for, 10 years or never, Congress could choose to do nothing about it. So it really is something that we can't control.
We have another question. Martha and Chuck, I'm not sure about your time constraints, but we're at 12:30 right now. So I'm available to be here for another 15 minutes, half hour if people have more questions. But let's get this one more in at least. From Elaine, because some of the historical places within this designation already receive other funds, does this affect funds available for a national historic area? And Elaine, if you want to unmute and add anything to that, feel free to do so.
If I understood the question correctly, would essentially the overlay of an NHA somehow endanger, existing funding, maybe coming through the Historic Preservation Fund, HPF grants, or some other type of funding? No, there's no relationship of where, say, there's only so much money that's going to go to a certain geographic area coming from the National Park Service, and if a certain amount of money is coming through this program, then we're going to reduce it in the other program because it would reach some sort of funding limit. Nothing like that exists. And remember that for a national heritage area, the money, whatever money and technical assistance the National Park Service is authorized to provide, and Congress sets those terms in the authorizing legislation that creates the NHA, it flows to the coordinating entity. And the coordinating entity receives the money and the technical assistance. And then they, in many cases, I won't say all, but in many cases, they subgrant it out. They run their own essential grant round. You know, maybe there's a library that wants to set up some kind of interpretive exhibit and they need a small amount of money to do that. Maybe there's a group that's trying to launch some sort of recreation oriented program, you know, in another part of the national heritage area. And so they ask for some money from the coordinating entity. These are matching grants, one-to-one match, so that they can go do that program. So many NHEs actually do, I think, what is supposed to happen with an NHA, which is to have a multiplier effect. And they spread the National Park Service funding to some degree and technical assistance around their large, you know, authorized boundary to encourage the kinds of programs just to support the community-driven preservation or conservation efforts that Chuck was describing on an earlier slide, in all kinds of ways, you know, economic development and tourism and resource protection and natural resource protection and so on and so on.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions or virtual hands raised or physical hands raised. I'm sort of scanning the room here. So I think with that, we will wrap up for today. Many thanks again to Martha and Chuck for presenting and being a part of the local government workshop this spring. As I said, we will post a PDF of the slides as soon as we can, and there are live links in there for all of the resources that Martha and Chuck talked about. And thank you all for attending, and have a great afternoon, everyone.